is theirs to walk. How does that sit differently with y'all? You can say it out loud or you can just sit with it. Broken spirits. It sounds different, doesn't it? Yeah. Anything else sound, feel different to folks? Translation always leaves behind the texture of the culture that it's translated into. Not right or wrong, but in the United Church of Christ, we follow the calling to make our faith new in each generation. To be named blessed or blessed might feel a little different than having Creator's blessing rest on you. Close your eyes for just a moment and imagine what it feels like to have Creator's blessing resting on you right now. It might feel the same. I'll leave room for that. For me, it feels warm and connected. Less like a declaration and more like a hug. You can open your eyes. Jesus was preaching to those who were suffering. These words are meant to go right past all the facades we put up, all the I'm okay, don't worry about it that we put out there, and right to the core of what hurts. It was those in front of him, those who had been longing to hear a message of love and liberation and hope, who had followed him to this mountainside. He was speaking to those who were seeking a healing of body and mind, those who were meek and hungry, those who were mourning and persecuted. Jesus was also telling the disciples what it meant to represent him in this world. The good road from above is theirs to walk, he says. In the version from Luke, Jesus is teaching among the crowds, but right before he begins speaking, he looks at his disciples like, pay attention, folks. This is what it's all about. He had just chosen them, he had claimed them, and he was now telling them, this is what it means, taking care of those you see now with tenderness and love as God would. This is what it means to create God's kingdom, to walk the way. The path of discipleship belongs to them. Blessed are those who mourn, reads the New Revised Standard Version. But this morning we hear, Creator's blessing rests on the ones who walk a trail of tears, for he will wipe the tears from their eyes and comfort them. A trail of tears is not a phrase accidentally chosen by a panel of Native scholars and elders and young people who poured themselves into this translation. The Trail of Tears, of course, is a term used by the Cherokee Nation, who were forced among 100,000 other indigenous people, forced off their ancestral lands so that white politicians could gain political power and so that white settlers could steal native land and wealth. It was a deadly and devastating act that is still mourned to this day. For me, this brings home the real challenge of the Beatitudes. Beautiful as they are meant to name some of the most difficult moments individuals and communities have experienced in this world. To name a people blessed in the midst of their suffering is not the same as blessing the systems and the violence that have caused that suffering. This passage has been twisted to say, it's okay that you're hurting now, because just wait. But to take that as the message is to ignore everything that Jesus did in his ministry and who he was preaching to. For Jesus never excused people's suffering, never justified it, never told them to just suck it up. Instead, he named the truth that God is nearest to us in the places where we experience hurt and struggle and shame and vulnerability and fear. God is nearest to those places that are tender and raw. Like a balm, Creator rests over the places that shed tears and blood and despair. The first time I really deeply grieved the loss of a loved one, it opened up something in me that I had never experienced before. I had lost before, I had had my heart broken before, I had said goodbye to people and places I wasn't ready to say goodbye to. But the first time I really deeply grieved, it felt like I could understand something, I could sense something that hadn't really previously made sense to me. It was kind of like falling in love and all the sappy songs on the radio make sense, but a really devastating opposite. I wouldn't hope for it, I wouldn't wish for it, but I can see the power of understanding loss at work in this congregation. People who have mourned often know how to sit with others who are mourning. People who have experienced a mental health crisis often know how to be with others who are experiencing the same. People who have faced a terrifying diagnosis know how to hold others through it. Not always. Not only if you've gone through the exact same thing, but as we walk the good road, as we follow in the way, as we create the kingdom of heaven, our experiences, once healed, offered to others, create a portal into greater understanding. When Wendell was first born, and in those early days of like, what is day and what is night, who's to really say, Mara and I were watching a lot of RuPaul's Drag Race. Has anyone here watched RuPaul's Drag Race? Okay, great. I was hoping there'd be one. There are lots of twists and turns in this competition as drag queens complete lip-syncing, sewing, acting, designing, comedy challenges. It's really a wild ride. I can't say I recommend it, but we're on season 15. So, but almost all the way through the season, RuPaul holds up a picture of each queen when she was maybe 1 or 2 or 5 years old, a really cute little kid picture, and asks them, what would you say to your younger self? Oftentimes these pictures represent a gender, a life, a moment in time before life got really hard, but when the seeds of who they were already there. And these are some of the things they say. From Rosé. You are so severely blessed by a love that your parents will teach you throughout your life. A lot of kids don't have that. And one day you'll find something called drag. And you will finally begin to understand yourself, and then it's your job to teach others that love. From Willow Pill, or Willow Pill. You have so much joy in life in you, it's insane. You're just going to feel like life takes everything away from you. And you're going to have to grieve people around you, and you're going to have to grieve yourself. But in stripping yourself away from this earth, you're going to be doing yourself a favor. Because you'll learn to let go, and the queerness of the universe will shine through you. From Bosco, one more, a Seattle queen. You're going to have to be very uncomfortable for a long time. And there will be a lot of times when you feel like apologizing for who you are. And I want you to know, do not apologize. Be fierce. Be louder. One day the things that people bring you down for will be your power. And the most common thing we hear again and again from these queens standing on stage, often with tears running down their face, is, I love you. Over and over again, we hear the power, sometimes the life-saving power of not just accepting, but loving the parts of ourselves that others have named wrong or lesser or unlovable. They look at their younger self with an understanding of themselves, their families, their gender, their bodies, and what comes out of their mouths sounds like Beatitudes to me. In loving the pieces of themselves that have suffered and hurt the most, they aren't saying that sexism and racism and homophobia and misogyny are good, but they are naming the transformative power that comes from having to claim their blessedness in a world that too often refuses to see it. Claiming our own blessedness and struggle and suffering doesn't mean there's less God to go around. You don't have to be suffering worse than others next to you in order to claim your blessedness. The power of the Beatitudes, the power of naming God's presence among those who suffer, the power of hearing a native translation of the scripture, the power of hearing a drag queen tell their younger self, I love you. This is the power that allows us to practice kingdom building among us. Sometimes we can love the pieces of ourselves that the world has told us are nothing. Sometimes the closest we can come is letting God love those pieces of ourselves. So this morning, I'm going to invite you to write out a few lines of your own version of the Beatitudes, because these were not meant to stay static. They were not meant to stay locked in one language, in one time, in one place. They were meant to reach us in all times and all places, as God reminds each of us that we are blessed. So Elizabeth, if you would pull up the prompt on the screen. I'm going to give you all a little bit of time now, and then if you want to finish during the prayer doodling time, you can do that as well. If you write multiple, just choose one or two to write on your yellow piece of paper or type into the chat box. And at the end of worship, I'm going to read these as a litany of our own Beatitudes. So the first part is to invite you to think about a part of yourself that feels like the world has told you is no good. A part of yourself that the world says is less than. Maybe you hide. Maybe you've had to work really hard to love. A part of yourself that hurts or grieves. A part of yourself that struggles. Maybe a part of yourself that out there is legislated against and preached against and looked down on, but in here, in your heart, you know is held and loved by God. So saying, Creator's blessing rests on the ones who, and then name that piece of yourself, or blessed are those who, and name that piece of yourself. And then I'll give you part two in a moment. You can look up at me when you're done, so I'll get a sense. Part two, if we can go to the next slide. You can keep working on part one if that's where you're at too. Is to finish the sentence. So we have blessed are those who, and you have a piece of the sentence, and then you have your pivot for they, because if you're experiencing this, someone else is too. So for they will, and then you can finish with how does this piece of yourself, how does this help you more clearly vision the kingdom of heaven? How does this piece of yourself help you vision peace and justice and love differently than maybe you would if this wasn't a piece of who you are? You might not have the answer right now, and that's okay too. This invitation is one you can take home with you as well, as you continue thinking about what are the pieces of myself where I might want to invite God's love in, where I don't experience acceptance or care, and how does that help me offer that to someone else? People of God, whether you have the answer, whether you've written something out on your paper, maybe you have a whole notebook full already, or maybe there's just something blank staring back at you, hear this. You are a beloved child of God. There's no piece of you that God is ashamed of, no piece of you that is beyond God's care and love. Amen.
Our responsive song today is Come to the Water. The words are on the worship aid.
As we enter into the time of communion, we are invited to come to the Lord, to come to this table that does not belong to Spirit of Peace or to the United Church of Christ, but belongs to God and is open to all. There are no requirements, there are no prerequisites for coming and partaking in the goodness and life that is available to us here. For we remember that night that Jesus sat around the table, preparing for one of the most difficult days to come. He sat alongside the one who would betray him and offered to him and to each person there. Offered to each